Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
There are few questions as enduring, as passionately debated, or as spiritually and politically charged as the question of who the chosen people of the Bible truly are. The concept of divine election, being chosen by God for a specific covenantal purpose, has inspired nations, guided empires, and incited wars. But in modern times, amidst shifting historical paradigms and new interpretations of ancient texts, one group has risen into prominence by presenting a deeply provocative and complex challenge to the mainstream narrative: the Black Hebrews, often referred to more broadly as the Hebrew Israelites. Their claim is audacious, even radical to some, that the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, African Americans and their dispersed kin across the globe, are not merely a people wronged by history, but are in fact the literal descendants of the ancient Israelites of the Bible. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, but genealogically and covenantally. This assertion, simultaneously historical, theological, and racial, has generated intense interest and even more controversy. Who are the Black Hebrews? What does their claim rest upon? And perhaps most importantly, could they truly be the people of the book? The story begins in the ancient Near East, where the Hebrew people first emerged as a Semitic tribe in the land of Canaan, eventually coalescing into the nation of Israel. According to the Hebrew Bible, the Israelites descended from Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, and were eventually enslaved in Egypt before being led to freedom by Moses. They settled in the Promised Land and formed the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. This history, primarily sourced from the Torah, forms the backbone of Jewish identity and tradition. However, when it comes to physical and ethnic descriptions of the Israelites, the Bible is largely silent, or at least nonspecific. While certain passages reference hair texture, skin color, and geography in symbolic or poetic language, there are no clear anthropological descriptions. This ambiguity has led to centuries of speculation and debate. Ancient depictions of Semitic peoples and Egyptian art show a range of complexions, from light brown to deep bronze, further complicating our modern assumptions about race and antiquity. This ambiguity opened the door for various groups throughout history to claim descent from the Israelites. From the Lemba people of southern Africa, who have genetic markers linking them to the ancient Levites, to Ethiopian Jews Beta Israel, whose presence in East Africa has been documented for millennia, the idea that ancient Hebrews may not have been confined to one geographic or phenotypic identity is not as fringe as it once seemed. The Black Hebrew movement draws heavily on these arguments, but it also introduces a newer, more politically charged narrative. The origins of the modern Black Hebrew movement are found in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when African American thinkers and spiritual leaders, reacting to the legacies of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism, began to explore religious identities outside of the Christian framework that had often been used to justify their oppression. One of the earliest organized groups was the Church of God and Saints of Christ, founded in 1896 by William Saunders Crowdy, a former slave who claimed divine revelation that African Americans were the true descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. During this same period, in Harlem and other urban centers, Black leaders began forming congregations that fused Old Testament law with a cultural reclamation of African heritage. In the 1960s and 70s, amid the broader Black power and civil rights movements, the ideology expanded further. Groups like the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, led by Ben Ami Ben Israel, migrated to Israel, settling in the Negev desert town of Dimona. They lived a lifestyle reminiscent of biblical customs, vegetarian, communal, Torah-observant, and lobbied for recognition from the Israeli government, which initially resisted but later granted them permanent residency. The Hebrew Israelites were not monolithic, however. There were and still are many sects, ranging from mainstream, peaceful religious communities to fringe militant groups who adopt incendiary rhetoric. But all share the foundational belief that Black people, particularly those affected by slavery and colonialism, are the true Israelites spoken of in the Bible. The case made by Black Hebrews is deeply rooted in Scripture, though it is often interwoven with cultural interpretation and esoteric readings. One of their most frequently cited passages is Deuteronomy 28, where Moses delivers a warning to the Israelites that disobedience to God's commandments will bring about national calamity, including exile, poverty, and slavery. Verse 68 is often emphasized, "And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee." The phrase "with ships" is interpreted as a reference to the Atlantic slave trade, since ancient Egypt was accessible by land, not sea, making the ship reference anomalous and symbolically potent. They argue that the signs of the curses, being scattered among nations, serving enemies, loss of heritage, and a collective identity crisis, align more closely with the historical experiences of African-descended peoples than with modern Jewish populations, many of whom did not experience slavery on the same systemic or global scale. Further, they assert that if these biblical prophecies apply to African Americans, then they must, by definition, be the descendants of those Israelites to whom the warnings were given. Critics of this interpretation point out that biblical prophecy is highly symbolic and that many peoples have suffered slavery, exile, and hardship. Jewish scholars maintain that the lineage of the Israelites has been preserved through matrilineal descent, religious continuity, and historical documentation, none of which are present in the Black Hebrew narrative in a traditional sense. However, proponents counter that history is written by the victors and that the erasure of their heritage was part of the prophetic punishment. The academic world has approached the Hebrew Israelite claims with a mixture of caution, skepticism, and increasing interest. The question of Israelite descent is complicated by the fact that over the millennia, the Jewish people have undergone vast migrations, intermarriage, and persecution, including multiple exiles from their homeland. Genetics has confirmed links between Jewish populations worldwide, including Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Mizrahi communities, but it has also revealed that Jewish DNA is not uniform. The Lemba people in southern Africa, as mentioned earlier, present a compelling case. They have oral traditions of Semitic ancestry, observe dietary laws similar to kashrut, and some possess the Cohen modal haplotype, a Y chromosome pattern associated with the priestly class of ancient Israel. While not directly part of the African American Hebrew Israelite movement, their example is frequently cited as evidence that ancient Israelite dispersion may have reached farther than traditional historians acknowledge. There's also the question of the Ethiopian Jews, who practiced Mosaic law long before any modern Jewish community reached them. Although their origin story differs from that of the Hebrew Israelites, their long-standing connection to Jewish practice and identity forced the state of Israel to grapple with the idea that Jews could be black, not converts, but ancient heirs to the covenant. As for African Americans, some genetic studies have shown minor Middle Eastern admixture in West African populations, likely the result of trans-Saharan trade and Islamic influence rather than Israelite lineage. However, others argue that the destruction of African historical records during colonialism and slavery makes it impossible to fully dismiss their claims. The historical silence could, in this view, be part of the very curse outlined in Deuteronomy. At its heart, the Black Hebrew movement is not just about ancient history or even divine election. It is about reclaiming identity in the face of a world that has systematically stripped it away. For many African Americans, Christianity was introduced through enslavement and forced conversion. Embracing a Hebrew identity, therefore, becomes not just a spiritual act but a political one, a form of decolonization and a reclamation of divine agency. This struggle echoes broader theological questions that span religions and cultures. Who gets to define chosenness? Is it a matter of blood, belief, or both? Can a people lose their covenant through disobedience, or is God's promise irrevocable? The Jewish tradition, as preserved in Rabbinic Judaism, has long maintained that the covenant is eternal, passed through maternal lines, and safeguarded through religious practice. Hebrew Israelites often reject this rabbinic authority, asserting that the loss of language, tradition, and homeland were all foretold, and that their current awakening is part of a divine plan to restore the true Israel. Are the Black Hebrews the true chosen people of the Bible? The answer may depend on where you stand theologically, historically, or politically. What is clear is that their claim is not easily dismissed. It is rooted in Scripture, emboldened by historical erasure, and sustained by a deep sense of spiritual calling. Whether viewed as a prophetic awakening or a reinterpretation of identity, the rise of the Black Hebrew Israelites has forced scholars, theologians, and lay people alike to reconsider long-held assumptions about race, religion, and the legacy of the Bible. In a world increasingly defined by questions of justice, inclusion, and historical truth, perhaps the more important question is not who has been chosen, but who has been heard.